Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Last week, Academic Agent released a video on a bombshell report outlining the activities of the Community Relations Service, which is a shadowy organization that, despite its rather benign name, actually might be responsible for stage managing a large part of the civil rights revolution, including handling different scenarios where there are riots going on and where people's family members are killed by minority people in the United States, and ultimately handling the backlash to that. Lots of secrecy, but this thing broke open wide. I actually ended up doing a thread responding to his video on Twitter, and that actually went very wide as well, all the way to the point where I got contacted by the Trump administration about this program. So Academic Agent, thanks for putting this together, and thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, cheers, Auron. I mean, there's only a few times in my life that I've read a book that has been mind-blowing. I mean, one time was James Burnham's Machiavellians, which completely transformed how how I think about politics and everything. Basically, I'm sure you had the same experience when you read that book. Another book is a book called "Who Paid the Piper," which basically just shows how much of politics has been man-managed and is essentially a kind of a top-down enterprise. Um, and I thought, well, that was a mind-blowing book. But then this book, which was called America's Peacemakers, it only came out in 2020. Basically spilled the beans on this community relations service, a secret, a quasi-secret agency. I mean, it's not secret in so much as it admits it exists. It exists, right? It's secret in so much as it doesn't reveal. It won't kind of divulge what it's been up to, and actually has powers way beyond what you'd expect. You know, on the surface, it's there to um, mediate between racial communities in America, but in practice, it is basically man-managed protests, civil rights, race relations, to an extent that is extraordinary. I mean, we used to have these debates, Aaron, about how much is top down and how much is emergent and so on. I remember there was this phrase they used to describe people like Alex Jones. You know, they talk about the paranoid style in American politics, like the John Birches and so on. Everything's a conspiracy. Reading this book, I could not help but think about the paranoid style of American government, because they leave nothing, and I mean nothing, to chance. The way I describe most of what they've done, if you can imagine race relations between the black community and the white community in America, and incidentally, throughout this book, black is capitalized, capital B, white is a little, white has
Of
got a
course, of
little
course,
W.
right.
Very difficult not to not to spot that. So, and that, I think, basically tells the whole story of the book, because um, really what the CRS it has been since 1964, when it came into being through the Civil Rights Act, through Title 10, has been a tilt. Basically, whenever there's any dispute, political dispute, struggle for power between these two groups, the CRS more or less puts its foot on the scale to ensure that the black community get the better of it, including giving them on the ground political advice, telling them of things they would have otherwise not be aware of, covering up or covering for violence, to minimize what they call white backlash. Um, in one notable case, even kind of playing down murder. So that's one part of what they did. And then another part of what they did is basically managing the black community to ensure that they stay on the kind of Martin Luther King Jr. reservation or side of things, rather than going Malcolm X, if you want to put it that way. Um, So yeah, I just found it really, I mean, not just an eye opener, just jaw dropping how open they are in this book. And
And,
I,
and, and I,
go on, Aaron.
I was just gonna say, and I love the fact that this super secretive organization that has all these special privileges, which we'll talk about in a second. We wouldn't have known most of what they've been doing if they didn't just explain it like Bond villains, right? Like they were so proud of the work that they had done that they didn't recognize what it would sound like to everyone else. So they just bragged about it and broke this veil of secrecy that they had given to them by the Civil Rights Act, and that's the only reason we know. And I do want to get deeper into this, of course, but before we do, let's hear from today's sponsor. Hey guys, it's almost Father's Day, and if you're still scrambling for a gift, don't worry, we've got you covered. Forget the last minute grill gadget or coffee mug. What your husband or father really wants is something that speaks to his values. And in a world that mocks masculinity, traditional values, and fatherhood, he needs a place that still has his back. And that's where Blaze TV comes in. We honor masculinity and we honor the contributions of fathers. And right now, you can grab our Father's Day special, which is $30 off an annual subscription when you use the code DAD30 this week only. It's a fast and easy way to pick up something that your father will really enjoy, and you don't have to bother wrapping it. So skip the predictable gift, and this Father's Day, give him something that actually matters. Go to blazetv.com/Auron and use DAD30 to grab the deal. That's blazetv.com/Auron with the code DAD30. All right. So, AA, let's start at the beginning because a lot of people may not have seen your video or the thread. They may not be familiar. What is the CRS? Like, we know ostensibly it's supposed to exist to smooth these things over. And like, what was it created? Where was it created? And why does it get its powers? And what are these secret protections it has that makes it so hard to know what was going on if they hadn't read a book about it?
Well, I mean, they started with one of the other remarkable things, Aaron, is that even though Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, they'd been planning this agency as far back as 1959, when Lyndon B. Johnson, was a senator. And I mean, there are this whole cast of characters who are basically civil rights activists that then plan this department. And essentially what they do is they set up a little fiefdom, a little protected agency within the federal government that lots of people don't know, even still. I mean, I was at an event last week. I mentioned it to 5 or 6 different Americans. They'd never heard of it. Most people have never heard of this. Up until 2 weeks ago, I had never heard of this. So they planned it in the late 50s, and they tried various different ways to get this to exist, and then finally they smuggled it into Title 10 of the Civil Rights Act when it was passed in 1964. And I mean, in theory, it's there to promote civil rights, okay? And it's there, the Civil Rights Act sets up various protected characteristics for different groups. So, there's the Black community. Later on, there's the LGBT plus plus plus. That gets added on later. Sex, gender gets added at some point. So what the Civil Rights Act is there for, but this agency, the CRS, is there basically to ensure that things are always pushed in that direction. When Curtis Yarvin said years ago, Cthulhu, always swims left. What he didn't mention, or perhaps he didn't know, is that there is a government agency, a secret one, this CRS, that's there to absolutely make sure that it goes that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the really striking things when you read the accounts, because they go through lots of really important events that happen in American history, like Selma. There's a whole chapter on this, and various other things that happen. What they don't tell you is that the civil rights side. So, okay, there would have been real activists, there would have been organic and grassroots people. But in all the official accounts, they don't say, well, actually, also, there were these kind of like spooks on their side, giving them advice, calling plays, smoothing things over with the media, actually bullying and threatening the media to make sure that it was their side that won out. And of course, in each of these cases, there was organized political resistance coming from, the white community, you could say, of that time. And of course, they weren't getting this extra special leg up or help. They were being painted in the worst possible light imaginable, um, including, where there's violence, making sure that their violence is played up, making sure that violence on behalf of the civil rights activists is always played down, things like that. So that is, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to what, I mean, would you agree that's basically what they're there
Oh no,
for?
yeah. From what I saw, that's definitely the case, and it's wild because, of course, you and I have talked about this so often, but it's still very well held in most even conservative circles in the United States that the civil rights movement was this like organic struggle that the United States went through to overcome years of the Jim Crow and all these different race relations problems, and things just kind of developed because there's this natural desire for the things to move that direction. And actually, no, the whole thing is planned top down, literally by the government, using agents to go in and leverage these different. The big thing, and we'll talk about that for sure. But a big part of this is the media narrative control, right? Like it's making
Mhm.
sure that TV stations only hire the type of people who are going to take cues from the CRS, making sure that, like you said, the different aspects of any given altercation are played up so any white violence is heightened, and any minority violence is suppressed. The news of that is definitely toned down, making sure that different families give exactly the type of statements that these people want in order to, in their eyes, advance the cause. And so this is an explicitly political organization from its founding, always with an end in mind, and in the background, constantly putting, as you said, their thumb on the scale to make sure things turn out in a particular way. So just a high degree of confirmation with the elite theory idea that none of this stuff, like, don't get me wrong, there's always some level of organic interest in activists, these kind of thing. They're always pushing something that actually exists, but they are heightening it to a degree and giving an advantage to such a degree that it just, it blows everything out of proportion. And that's really, I think, a big highlight of the report here.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound unusual, but I don't know if people can remember the old Willy Wonka film, the Gene Wilder one.
Hmm.
If you remember, in that movie, when the kids win the golden ticket, there's this weird little character called Slugworth who who,
Yeah.
who who appears and whispers in their ear. This is really the vibe that these guys get. So it's like, okay, all these people like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and so on, they could have been real, they could have been organic, but then like this little character appears on the side and starts whispering in their ear, giving them advice, calling their plays, and then perhaps even more sinister, shaping their movement, making sure that their movement goes in a certain direction as well. And that's the
Right.
really striking thing, is the double control. It's not simply there as a kind of putting the kibosh on any momentum that white activists might have or the white backlash might have, but also making sure that the civil rights movement basically runs on these guardrails, right? And they can't ever get beyond a certain set of really specific talking points. Um, Another thing that we should probably talk about, Auron, is that if anybody's lived through the past 10 years and witnessed things like BLM, the Summer of Love in 2020, I remember distinctly back then we said, like, look, you've got to understand, a lot of people were freaking out and saying BLM are revolutionaries, they're taking over. This is it now. This is the communists are coming. And some of us back then said, look, you've got to understand, BLM are not revolutionaries. They are counter-revolutionaries, basically shock troops, stormtroopers for what we call the regime or for the government. And what this book does is really just give you receipt after receipt after receipt. I got a saying, it's Greta Thunberg's all the way down. And this is really like that as a book. I just couldn't believe it, Aaron. I just couldn't believe how little is left to chance by these people. One theory I've got is that the reason they wrote this book in 2020 is because at that point there was such hubris on the left, and there was such, I think they thought they had finally won during the Summer of Love, during George Floyd, and the tone of the book is like, oh, it's an urgent moment now in American history type thing. Let's explain to you what we've done in the past. Probably thinking like not a single like, Trump supporter is ever going to pick up or discover this book. You know, if you don't want people to read it, you probably shouldn't publish a book explaining
Well,
what you've been up to. You know,
it reminds me of the Time magazine article, right? Like the where they just came out and said, yes, there is a shadowy oligarchic conspiracy to get rid of Donald Trump and install Joe Biden, right? It's just like you said, it's end of history, victory lap. Okay, we've reached the summit. Politics is over. Everyone agrees with us now, or the people who don't agree with us are going to be out of power forever. So now we can just lay all the cards on the table. Not only can we admit it, we can do it as if we're the heroes, because everyone's going to laud us for engineering this scenario that we all love so much. But I had asked earlier, but we didn't quite lay it out. This organization has a level of secrecy and protection that is just insane, right? Like they're not subject to FOIA requests, as I understand, or they get limited information out of FOIA requests. They can refuse to testify, all kinds of stuff. And so the only way that we would know any of this is because of the book. Otherwise, they destroy their notes. They don't keep logs of what the agents are writing down and what they're doing. It's just wild that this, something that is supposed to be about public relations and helping the public, in theory, in practice, has that level of security and secrecy.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's almost kind of FBI level, not quite, because they don't have law enforcement powers the same as the FBI does, but they pretty much have almost everything else, and I mean, one of the things I found really interesting is that if Congress, if let's say some Republican senator watches this and was like, right, I'm going to haul up that CRS, and sometimes Ted Cruz has those sessions where he just kind of has a go at people. They could just refuse that, and the Congress wouldn't have any right to, get them to testify. They could just say, no, we have secrecy. I always found that really remarkable. If the government says, oh, well, it's a secret. Oh, well, okay, then it's a secret. Nobody's allowed to know. It's just kind of
some real democratic accountability there. That's our democracy at work. So let's talk a little bit about the training and the shaping of the movement, because I think that's a really important. You made the point that it's the control of both sides, right? So in the book, from as I'm aware, the guy, one of the guys who founded the CRS and helped to write the book, Bertrand Levine, he basically says the purpose of this organization is to bust up lily white towns, right? That's what they're there to do. Is you will be integrated at gunpoint. Basically, we're going to go in and we're going to force this. It's not about organically, hey, some black people want to live in this neighborhood. No, we're going to go in there. We exist, and they've done this with planting mosques in completely Christian towns, pushing trans stuff. It's not just the race stuff, but obviously that was where it was founded and where a majority of its work was done. But when they're going in to break up these towns and to create the situation, like you said, they're controlling any opposition white Americans might have to the way that their towns were being manipulated, the way that their politics were being manipulated. They're playing up any white violence against minorities and making sure to cover up any black or other minority violence against whites. But very interestingly, they're trying to make sure the civil rights movement never becomes a black nationalism movement, because they know that then it's not useful to them anymore, right? Like they need a specific type of civil rights activists to exist, because otherwise the heritage Americans might get a little antsy about what's going on with the civil rights movement.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things to understand is that the remit for this organization came out of the moment of desegregation. And I mean, we've all seen the images of people, being marched at gunpoint to school and things like that. That was the mindset at the time, and something that Lyndon B. Johnson in particular was keenly aware of, that this actually needed to be managed in such a way that basically people don't don't have a choice. Um, and that thinking seems to endure right the way through the 80s and the 90s. I mean, one of the things I distinctly remember was a campaign by Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if you of, but basically busing activists into an all-white town in Georgia, and then she had a kind of camera crew down there saying, "Look, this is the most racist town in America," and they uh, had interviews with people who were living in this town, basically saying, "Well, look, we don't want any outsiders living here," type of thing, and then scores and scores of non-white activists shipped into that area, and I think it actually became like a national, like a kind of a story that had national import, where all of a sudden people in New York and California had this as a concern, that there was this one town that existed that didn't
Right.
have any. And see, this is the thing. I look back on things like that now, and you can't help but wonder, okay, was this then? In fact, there was one this past weekend, Auron, with this stuff happening in LA. Do you remember there was the guys waving the Mexican flags, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, you better start waving American ones too, and the American
Yeah.
ones were kind of pristine and newly opened, and the
Yeah.
Mexican
Still
ones
have
were
the
clearly they weren't.
creases and everything. Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think, was that the CRS doing it then? Because how has that happened?
Yeah.
And it explains so much of the stuff that we saw, like during BLM. Who was leaving pallets of bricks there? Now, I'm not saying necessarily it was the CRS, but I'm saying now that you know this, and or that this sort of thing goes on, it kind of, we weren't going mad. We did, when we saw that footage, it now explains, or how come all their signs are so pristine and like made as if a corporation had made them? Well, this kind of answers a lot of these questions, because in our imagination, well, like, is this George Soros? Is this actually, maybe it's just the American government?
Well, it's like USAID, right? It's like, is wokeness
Yeah.
organic? Well, no, actually, it's just a export directly of the U.S. government, and the same seems to be true for civil rights violence. So let's talk about a couple of the projects that they have that we know they're a part of. Again, we could speculate, where they've been, and once you've seen this, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's real, right? The conspiracy is absolutely real. So once you've seen it, you're just speculating about how far it goes, especially since we couldn't even find out with congressional testimony how far this goes. So that's the best you can do. But we do know that they're involved in a few things. So, you outlined the fact that they were involved in working with activists in the 60s, of course. They were working with disciples of Saul Alinsky, basically allowing riots, but making sure that they didn't overflow to the point where they would agitate. They also have the Mercer Project, where they literally to this day still train left-wing activists, again, on your tax dollars, on how to agitate in these civil rights protests and get all this done. So again, none of this is completely organic. None of this is just bubbling up. This organization is behind the scenes working with radical leftists, Saul Alinsky disciples, training new ones out there all the time to ensure that when a protest hits the ground, these trained individuals are ready to manipulate the scene.
Yeah. Yes, and like I said, I mean, you'd have to go through the book case by case, but it's pretty much any major incident in American history involving race. Rodney King, uh, Selma, like I mentioned. I mean, there are a number of pretty high-profile cases
Yeah, all the way
where
up to
there was,
Trayvon Martin in the
yeah,
modern day, right?
absolutely. And the thing is that, as far as I know, Aaron, they're still going now. And this is one of the things that occurred to me was, in all this time, not a single Republican thought, yeah, we better shut this down, or we better amend, like when they had majorities in Congress, or when you had the situation where it was a Republican president with both houses, they never thought, oh, we better do something about this, just like some sort of amendment. Or is it the case that nobody can touch the Civil Rights Act at all, and that's why it's been left? I mean, you would know better than me.
I, I
Um,
I think it's
yeah.
I think it's that the Civil Rights Act is actually so politically difficult to deal with. But also, I think that most Republican presidents probably just saw this as, oh, it's a civil rights organization. That's fine. Like because to them,
Mhm.
civil rights equals good, right? And this is one of the things, one of the difficult, mountains we're trying to climb here. One of the reasons that thread blew up is I wrote it in reaction to Chris Rufo saying, okay, I know there are people out there advocating for the repeal of the Civil Rights Act. Why should we get rid of it? What's the actual case? Because we know this is this giant mountain to climb. And the answer is stuff like the CRS, which is baked deep into the government. Again, this is just what we know now, right? This could go much
Mhm.
deeper. They could be more organizations, there could be more manipulation, but this is just what we know. And I did actually, and this is how wild, this blew up. I did get contacted by the Trump White House, the Office of
Good.
Management and Budget wanted to let me know that this organization was on their radar. Because to be fair, guys like raw egg nationalists have been reporting on this previously. I think this was the most extensive report that revealed the most that we had. I think because I don't think he knew about the book, but this was already on the Trump administration's radar because of that reporting, and so they were already planning to defund it. And so that
Mhm.
is now in the bill. That is actually in the bill that's sitting around waiting to get passed. Is a defunding of the CRS. However, you can't remove it because it is a statutory requirement of Title 10. So you would actually have to repeal the Civil Rights Act or amend the Civil Rights Act if you actually wanted to get rid of it. To this point, the only thing the Trump administration can do without legislative action is that defunding.
Yeah, I mean, I would say though that the Civil Rights Act has been amended several times because it keeps on being added to.
Mhm.
Right. So, but back in 1964, there was no such thing as a transgender, blah blah blah. That was added to. And in fact, I gave a talk last week where I was looking into this because I was asking the question, to what extent is woke downstream from law, right? And why is it that it went so crazy after 2009, 2010? And one of the things I found was this anti-hate crime legislation that Obama put through in 2009. It's the name of two senators, where basically they said, well, it's not enough to be neutral as an institution or to be reactive. You now have to be proactive, and that happened in 2009, and that had implications for things in the Civil Rights Act. So the Civil Rights Act has been added to or amended or changed since 1964. So I mean, what I'm saying is that what I would say to Chris Rufo, for example, is that, well, okay, maybe it doesn't need to be a full repeal of the Civil Rights Act. Maybe we can just take this bit out, for
Right.
example, baby steps.
Well, let's talk a little more about what they do here, because the other really interesting project they have is Operation Rumor Control, which again
Mhm.
continues to operate to this day and has a significant hand in manipulating the media understanding. Again, they know how important it is to control the message, control the frame, control the narrative. Can you lay out what Operation Rumor Control does and how it got so much influence in like local media?
Yeah, I mean, this is basically what we'd recognize today as fact checking before fact checking. Um, they would basically go in and, let's say, I don't know, I mean, there were actual cases like, oh, a fight had broken out between two sets of protesters, or a group of black activists had beaten up like a white student, as some example. Okay. um and well, you know how things are, rumors can go around in different places. They would basically step in and be like, right, all of these sorts of things are misinformation. Here's what actually happened. And they'd actually go in and intervene, tell media organizations what the kind of true official position is, in each case, in a manner that is really quite similar to the fact checking that we've seen for Trump for the past 10 years. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was them telling Reuters. I have no idea, but um, that's basically what they did. Um, Another thing they did at some point was, they were very keen on having black representation on screen and making sure that the depiction, of black people in media was not negative. which again, today we'd think of as, oh, well, this is woke, this is DEI, and so on. But they were doing this stuff back in the early 70s, with threats and blackmails, and at one point they even boast about, uh, threatening to revoke something called an FCC license, which is a broadcast license
Yep.
essentially, and actually telling various different activist groups that this secret power or this hidden power exists, so that they have leverage in all of those in all of those positions, and media moguls, even if they were initially reluctant to do any of this stuff, they were basically bullied into complying. And this was in the early 70s. This wasn't in the 90s or the 2000s. This was a very long time ago.
Yeah. So to be clear, once again, they were literally blackmailing news stations and saying, you have to hire exactly the kind of people we want you to hire and be malleable to our type of manipulation of different stories. Take our fact checks on board when you look at different stories, because if you don't, we'll pull your FCC license. You won't be able to operate as a broadcaster in the United States anymore. So the news was literally held at gunpoint until it complied with what the community relations service wanted put out there as a narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the most insidious things that the CRS does is it manages the way that grieving families respond to the murder of their loved ones. So we've seen this pattern before. We've always thought it was strange, but we didn't know for sure what was going on. But there's this crime, a minority person does some kind of crime to a white family. As always, we have to downplay it. So the CRS hits the scene, they get control of the media narrative, and then they go to the family. And usually it's an older male member. They're told to go out there. Often they're reading a prepared statement, but it's not prepared by them. They didn't write it out. It's something the CRS has helped to coach them through. And the narrative is always the same. Oh, let's not worry about the race. I don't want this to be about racial issues. I don't want there to be any backlash to what happened here. I want to make sure that we're focusing on the good things about my relative who died. Let's not talk about any tensions that might exist between racial communities. In here, it's really all, the crime is not the focus. The focus is how saintly my child or my husband or wife or whoever was. And ultimately, we need to forgive. It's all about forgiveness. Lots of people noticing how weird this is, how the people look like they're kind of like out there at gunpoint and the frog march out there. But this is something that has happened reliably because this is something CRS is producing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this country, we have a nudge unit that does this sort of thing, and we discovered who they were as well. But one of the famous cases here was that, do you remember there was that bombing in the Manchester stadium? I think it was at
Yeah.
Ariana Grande, um, and basically making sure that there was no anger after that, and they actually used the Oasis song "Don't Look Back in Anger." So it's been like a kind of running joke that whenever there's a disaster in Britain, everybody has to get the candles out and sing "Don't Look Back in Anger." But the playbook here is exactly the same as that. Um, and yeah, I mean it's really insidious. Like one of the examples you mentioned, raw egg nationalist. There was a white guy who was killed by a group of Somalis. And I looked into that
In
story.
Maine, yeah. Yeah.
I was like, I wonder how that was actually reported in the local press, as we were talking about. And if you look up the headlines, it says things like "Man dies after struggle." So you basically get zero information in the
Right.
headline. It just sounds neat. It just sounds, oh, well, maybe he had a bit of a scuffle and, oh, he's died of injuries. What it does not say is who did it or what it was about or anything like that. And that is very much the sort of thing they do, because what they were trying to prevent was any sort of backlash against the quote unquote Somali community or Somalis in general. Um, yeah.
Well, that was the
Yeah.
most wild revelation of that was it, normally the CRS has to go and deploy on the ground, right? Like they got, okay, this event happened. We need to rush in there and talk to the community and manage the media and get a hold of the family and all this stuff. But the big thing about what happened in Lewiston, Maine, was they, at least as far as we can tell, the Somalis there had been brought there by the government. The government, this is one of those resettlement projects we've seen with Haitians and in the middle of the country and this kind of thing. So this is another one of the forced immigration, forced integration scenarios. And because the government was already involved in basically injecting these Somalians into this, it's Maine. There's not a lot of black people in Maine. If you're not familiar with the area here in the United States. But the fact is that they were already purposely diversifying that neighborhood, and they expected there to be a lot of tension between the Somali community that was being dropped into Maine and the locals there. And so the CRS was already on the ground because they expected violence. So it's not that they rushed in and, we've got a case of flare up, we've got to get involved. They had already created this artificial community, this artificial diversity. They expected violence out of this diversity. And then when it occurred, they stage managed the whole thing to play it down and once again get a hold of the family, manipulate the news media, the whole thing back to front.
What's really troubling about this book, Auron, and the tone of it, because it's written by one of the founders of it, like the people who've been doing it, since the 60s. One of the things I found was that it was almost like no white concerns are valid whatsoever. So, I mean, there's one account where these students get into an altercation, and a white student basically, gets beaten up, and then some of his friends are like, well, they start getting angry, and just the way it's written about, it's as if like, well, none of the people, like, really nobody has the right to be upset about that white kid being beaten up. Right, it's just written in such a way as if like, yeah, all of your concerns are racist, but they're de facto already bad and racist. And then on the other hand, if you're from the black community, all your concerns are absolutely valid. You've got a right to be angry. You've got and this, I mean, in this country, we talk about two-tier justice, or there's a nickname for Keir Starmer, two-tier Keir. But for me, it was really difficult not to see a complete two different standards of expectations and behavior, and even kind of like moral judgment placed on these two different communities by a government agency. Which, I mean, if I was American, I'd find it even more troubling than I do now, because it's basically saying like, well, if you happen to be in that small W white part of America, you're basically a second-class citizen.
Well, and again,
it's hard to draw any other conclusion.
Well, and again, the amazing thing is that they manufactured so many of these situations. So it's not just like they're handling some organic problem that bubbled up. Like, they wanted to disrupt white towns. They wanted to introduce racial tension. They wanted to artificially diversify the United States and continue to do so to this day, to be clear, guys. Like, this is not some ancient history we're uncovering. This is a organization that has actively been involved to this day in manufacturing a particular type of community in the United States, expecting violence, expecting the tension, and then, like you said, putting their thumb always on the scale of minorities, always on the scale of immigrants, always on the scale of progressive clients. So all of the things about race relations in the United States, all of the flare-ups, all of the stories about all these horrible things white people did, and a lot of this can be entirely manufactured by the CRS, and has been. And so much of what you know about history and much of what you know about race relations in the modern day, entirely manipulated, always with the intention, as you say, of putting the white community on the bottom and elevating every other community, even when it goes beyond race, when it goes to trans kids and the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, I mean, there's this tone as if to say, if you want to protect the town you grew up in, or keep it looking the way that it did as you grew up, or you don't want any newcomers there, or you, I don't know, object to the fact that, importing a new group like those Somalis may increase crime or something. You basically don't have a right to any of those things. And there's a kind of, there's almost like an aggression there, where it's like, how dare you have a problem with what we're trying to do here? That's how it comes across to me, anyway. And it's shock. I mean, basically, it's a national scandal for
It should
America.
be,
It's a
and
national
honestly,
scandal.
it should be, and honestly, we're going to stay on this. It's being buried right now. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the news cycle right after this broke, and Rufo was sharing it out, and lots of people were sharing it out. Obviously, we have the Trump Musk breakup, and then right after that, we have obviously the continued LA riots. However, that's probably a good time for us to transition a little bit to discussion of that, because obviously, as far as we know, because that budget has not been passed, the CRS could still be active right now, could be on the ground in LA right now, likely is on the ground in LA right now. And we have no idea what they're doing. And Congress can't ask them, can't force them to testify. Freedom of Information Act, it will not bring most of this to light. So we can only speculate. But looking at what's happening right now in the United States with the LA riots, what is your take? Because I think that this is actually really devastating for the Democrats. This is the first thing they were able to really glom onto after Trump's win. They've kind of been reeling. They don't know what to do. They decided to make like the deportation of a gangbanger and a wife beater like their top issue. And now with the LA riots, it's just so clear that what we have here is a absolute need to mass deport these people and to clean out the federal bureaucracy and the state governments as well, because California is just allowing these people to burn things down. They're basically, people have done threads. Data Republican laid this out. The number of organizations, many of which that are state funded, which are actually organizing this, it's just insane.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, I think Gavin Newsom may have just cooked his chances of being president, because, I mean, how can I put? I mean, I can probably say this from thousands of miles away over this side of the pond, but I just don't understand how it can be the official position of elected representatives in state level government or national level government, or how it can be the position of one of your two main political parties, that citizenship just doesn't matter. You don't have a country if a passport doesn't mean anything,
Right.
or if you're just rewarding people for sneaking across the border. And this seems to be the official position of that mayor who's in LA, and now of Gavin Newsom. It's just like, I mean, I have had the thought before. Is like, I don't understand how the Democrat Party can be allowed, because it surely has to be like, they have to take an oath, don't they? It surely has to be a prerequisite to be an official at any level in the American government, or at state level, that you at
You
least
defend the
believe,
Constitution of the United States of America. It's the classic
that you
plan.
believe in the nation of America, and that
Right.
being an American citizen actually matters for something. So I mean, this is a total non-starter. It's just a nonsensical position for the Democrats to have. And I mean, I've been saying it for years now. All the Democrats have to do is not be insane, but they just can't do it. And
Nope.
I mean, it would be the easiest thing in the world for Gavin Newsom just to be like, right, we need to restore law and order. Actually, Donald, I'll work with you on this one, because clearly the situation's out of control. Didn't do it, and look at them now. I mean, I mean, they've managed something I thought impossible, Auron, which is to be more insane than our Labour Party over here. You say what you want about Keir Starmer, at least he kind of vaguely believes in the notion of law, or being a British citizen actually meaning something. That doesn't seem to be a position in the Democrat Party at the moment.
Well,
It's just not a viable position.
and it's so wild because these are the same people who went on and on about the fact that like Russia bought, I don't know, like $5,000 worth of Facebook ads during the election, and they were manipulating the election, and we had to sanction Russia and we have to go to war with Russia over this. But then you have the president of Mexico who literally said, these are my people. Like the immigrants, just laying waste to the propositional nation 100%, being like, these are my people, these are my countrymen, their job is to send money back to us. And so you guys are trying to tax the money they're going to send back to us to keep our economy going. So we're going to encourage these protests. We're actually going to tell them to continue and put more pressure on the US government, just outright admitting that the Mexican diaspora in the United States is not a bunch of people who came here for better lives and they want to chase the American dream. No, it's people who think of themselves as Mexicans, who will always be Mexicans, who the Mexican government considers to be basically agents inside the United States working for their interests. How can you as a American political party align yourself with that and survive? It's just absolutely madness.
I mean, will it ever get to a point where just the American people, government, anybody with sense just says, look, this party, this Democrat party has clearly lost its way to a point, has become corrupt to a point where we just can't allow them anymore, right? I'm not saying there can't be a left-wing political party in America. I'm just saying, like, this Democrat party as it stands now, I mean, it's a problem. It's, I mean, well, the word is treason, basically. It's treason, is what it is.
No, it's treason. It's
treason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no other way to describe what's going on there. It's a criminal organization. It's treasonous. There's simply no other way to frame that. And they're obviously now trying to spread these protests across the United States. They're looking to do the BLM chain, right? This is the new BLM. This is the new suburb of love they're hoping for. And I think that's just insane. And again, we know so much of this is top down, right? We know so much of this is managed. But at this point, you have to say that if there is an adult in the room, if there are sane people, they simply don't control this anymore, because there is no way anyone with any kind of political acumen is looking at what's happening in LA and saying, you know what the Democratic Party needs? 10 more of these riots. That's what's going to do it. That's when it's going to defeat Trump. Like, I think it's self-destructive. I think they're committing political suicide.
Is there any kind of legs to the idea that, because every time I see Gavin Newsom, he's like goading Trump to arrest him as if he's like a student activist or something. Is there any possibility of any of these people actually being arrested by the federal government for dereliction of duty or something? Because they seem to be asking for it.
My guess is if the Trump administration was going to go after someone, it would not be arresting the officials because of the optics involved. However, what they could do, and I think they should do, is start arresting organizers and activists. So you are involved in the furtherance of criminal activity. You're involved in organizing violence. We're just going to snatch you off the street. We see you out there. We see you, facilitating this, handing out money, handing out, signs, building these shields that they carry around as signs. We're just going to snag you and detain you because you're dangerous. You cannot be allowed to operate in this area. I think that would be probably the way to go. Roll up these NGOs involved, roll up the activists, because if you go directly after the political opposition, that looks bad. However, the activists, I think, are pretty fair game.
One thing I have been cheered by is that, unlike 2020, it seems like Trump's not messing around this time. Yeah. I mean, at last I saw, the Marines had gone in and that they were actually dying down a little bit. So, I mean, that's been great to see, to be honest, because they shouldn't be allowed. I mean, why should these people be allowed to just get away with burning things down, causing chaos, burning cars, especially if some of them, and I'm sure some of them aren't even legally here.
Oh, no, of course not.
I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I'm also very heartened by the Trump administration's response this time. Last time, I think the idea was, well, one, we don't know how to handle this, but also two, it's going to look bad for us to break up these riots. It's going to look bad for us to go in on this stuff. This time, the Trump administration knows that actually letting these things burn out is not an option, that it will just destroy them. Also, I think this is, to be honest, I think this is a dynamic. The fact that these are Hispanic riots instead of Black riots matter because, well, the left loves its minorities. Let's be honest. Black Americans have this kind of political shield in the United States. They have this sacred status as the oppressed minority that grants you, basically plot armor when it comes to anything that's going on. So the Summer of Love could operate the way it did. There's lots of white Antifa guys out there, but it's the black rioters that really give it cover. This time, obviously, there are still some black rioters out there, but the majority of the people involved are not black. And I think that actually matters quite a bit as to what the Trump administration can do in this arena.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching some liberal coverage of this yesterday in our media. Horrible channel called LBC, which is kind of shitlib central. I don't know why I watch it because my blood pressure can't really handle it. But they actually mentioned that Trump was actively being undermined in 2020, that he wanted to do it, and people like Milley and other individuals then were undermining him or wouldn't give him the clearance that he wanted. Whereas, and they were saying this was a bad thing, obviously.
Right, right.
That now all of those kind of checks and balances aren't there in Trump 2.0 because he's got his own people there, and he's kind of made sure that there's not going to be any insubordination. In the liberal media, they think this is they think this is fascism. By the way,
Yeah.
fascism, by the way, is anytime anyone who's not a leftist uses power is fascism. But yeah, I don't really understand the liberal media position either, because they seem to be also on the side of the protests in this country. It's bizarre.
Well, it's just an admission of the deep state, right? It's just a total admission that the deep state is real, and that's what they expected to govern with, because they're like, well, of course, anytime Trump tries to do something, his own executive branch will stop him because it's actually full of our guys. And it doesn't matter what you do, your elections don't matter at all, because we control the apparatus, we control the actual executive branch, we control all the government agencies. So it's cute that you want to elect somebody like Donald Trump, but ultimately he's not going to be able to do what he wants to do, because we built into the system the idea that these guys are going to stand up to him. This time, a lot of people gave Trump a lot of guff for putting like Pete Hegseth, a former Fox News host, into this position. But the reason he did that is because these guys owe the system nothing. People like Tulsi Gabbard, people like RFK Jr., people like Pete Hegseth. Yeah, they might be wild. They might not be as buttoned down as you like. They may not give you the exact ideological answer you want, but every one of them shares the same trait. The people who run these organizations used to be hated by these organizations. So they're not here to ingratiate themselves in with the DOD or any of this stuff. They're there to do what Trump tells them to do. And so finally, they're actually getting stuff done.
One of the strangest things about the coverage I saw, though, was this idea that Trump kind of doesn't need to do this, and he's basically deliberately trying to make things worse to capitalize on the situation, and that he's loving it, and that his supporters are just loving the violence. Almost like Trump made this happen. It was even suggested that he needed a distraction from the Elon Musk thing. And so it was almost like, watching it was almost like Trump had made this happen in some way. I don't know if that's being mirrored by the likes of MSNBC and CNN over there, but it's a bizarre. It's like nobody has any agency in this situation apart from Trump. I don't get it. It's like, it's not like Trump asked these people to go out and riot, or like he made it happen. It was sounding pretty blue and on, to be honest. The stuff I watched. So yeah, I find that angle very strange.
They've got to do that, because what else are they going to say, right? Like, they can't just be like, yes, of course, actually, there are basically foreign combatants on your soil doing damage in the name of retaking Mexico, or retaking California from Mexico, and screaming La Raza, the race, as they do it. Like, that's a little too obvious, right? So they've got to spin some kind of narrative. And yeah, the only thing they've got is, well, Trump manufactured all of the stuff artificially, which is something that can only be believed by like a crazy wine ant watching MSNBC or LBC. So that's it's not playing with anybody else, right? The only people it can go to is the core constituency of hard left-wing progressives who need the world reframed for them. I don't think that narrative is taking any kind of real claim on the rest of the United States, or maybe Britain. I don't know how it plays over there, but I don't think it plays well here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same everywhere. Auron, normal people see it, for what it is, but there's a liberal elite in every country. Another thing I noticed they did is that they played pure friend enemy distinction with it. oh, well, these are our clients, therefore it's bad if the police go hard on them. But let's not forget when it was anti-lockdown protests, when it was truckers in Canada, when it was the Southport riots, they couldn't get enough
January
of it
6th.
then.
Yeah.
And the ultimate January the 6th, they couldn't get enough of it then. That's protecting democracy, right? Whereas if it's the National Guard's being called on these guys, well, that's fascism. So there was a lot of that going on. Where I think things are good now, though, is that I don't think anybody's listening to them anymore. I don't think anybody. I think the number of people who actually believe that is shrinking all the time.
Well, we have a number of super chats built up, so we should probably get to those. But it's been great talking to you about this. Obviously, this is, I think, a huge news story. I think we need to continue to push this into the popular zeitgeist. I think we need to talk about repealing or replacing parts of the Civil Rights Act that protect organs like this and mandate their existence. And so we're not going to let this one get buried. But before we go to the questions of the people, where can people find your great work?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, Academic Agent, which you'll find on YouTube if you just whack it in. I have a Substack, which is called The Forbidden Texts, and I'm on Twitter as well as Academic Agent on X, which sounds a bit boomery, but somebody taken the name Academic Agent, so I had to call myself that.
Well, with Roland Rat gone, there's only so many options.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody's taken that now as well. So,
all right, guys, let's make sure you're. I'm sure most of you have already subscribed to Academic Agent, but if for some reason you have not, make sure to check out his work. And you've got some college courses over there people can try out, right? They should.
Yeah, the Trivium, Foundations of Shakespeare is the latest one. Buy it now, as many hundreds, thousands of people have done.
Excellent. All right, let's see here. We've got Brom Zwingle, who says, AA talking with Auron, maybe my future mother-in-law, will finally check out AA's work. She's already watches and loves Auron. Well, AA, of course, has been on many times, and I've been on his channel. So, yeah, absolutely. Crossovers there. Based Future says, what particular cigar will you be sending AA? As we already discussed, guys, we did call the Cigar Slam. I think we can see that both much of this is top down and managed, but also much of this is out of control. The people managing it don't seem to have great instincts any longer or restraint. So I think both of us proved points in that particular discussion.
I think the Democrats have shown that they just cannot moderate, even if they want to. They're just too mental. This LA thing would have been the time, especially if Gavin Newsom wants to be the president.
And he was already trying. He was already trying to do that. I don't know if you remember this, but Gavin Newsom was dialing back the rhetoric, dialing back some of the woke rhetoric. He was he was having conversations with guys like Charlie Kirk on his podcast. Mm-hmm. He was trying to tack back to the center. And then this just blew. So like I said, they know they should put the woke away. They know that's the right move, but they just can't. They literally, like, even a guy like Newsom, who's an entirely moral political animal, ultimately can't walk away from it because that's what his party wants.
The problem they've got, and a similar thing happened in this country, right? Keir Starmer is trying to use the Tony Blair playbook. He gave a speech a couple of weeks back that was compared to Enoch Powell, right? This is how far Labour are trying to.
It was an amazing moment.
Strategy. He said, immigration's been a disaster. It's called the Island of Strangers speech. If you're an American, you haven't watched it. It's a kind of historic speech that he gave. But the trouble is that 6 months ago, riots took place, and he came out and locked up a pile of people and called anybody who was concerned about it far right. So this is the trouble. Things keep on happening that are catching the left on the hop. Yep. While they're trying to do this transition, so they're being forced into going back to their stupid woke mode while they're trying to do this transition, and of course everybody remembers it in real time. Keir Starmer can't walk. He's going to have to come out and say, I apologize to the nation for calling you all far right. And but I don't know, like, how does Gavin Newsom walk this back? He can't.
Nope.
he can't walk it back, right? So it's kind of
Uh, and again, he's trying to play the middle, but it's just not working. And his ultimately his foot soldiers are demanding of him that he hold to the ideology that he sold to them previously. So again, he knows he shouldn't be doing this. He tried to escape it, but he just got pulled back in. Broman Hank says to the people in chat asking about Sargar Slam, this has been retconned and is no longer canon by order of management. That's right. We Stalined the Cigar Slam. It's just been pushed out of the picture, off the boat.
I will say that I was at an event last week, which was all about woke, right? And there were tons and tons of graphs and things like that showing that on paper, at least, it peaked in 2020, 2021 with the Summer of
Mhm.
Love, with if there was a guy, Eric Kaufman, who you may have heard of,
Yeah.
he's got loads and loads of stats. The trouble they've got, which you have correctly identified, and which a lot of speakers at this event were saying, is that it's like how the people on the ground level, the people who've bought into this stuff, the people who've actually transitioned, for example, or the people who've like made their name in this. How do you walk this stuff back now? How do you moderate from where you've been? And how do you so on the actual ground level, like at the level of an individual college or university or institution where these people are still in situ, it's like they've got the idea. So I was basically right on they want to do it, but
Yeah.
I think you were right on it's going to be tricky to actually do it because they just can't stop being crazy.
Well,
They just
I've
can't
sat
stop.
I've sat in these meetings. I was teaching at a public high school. I have sat there while a morbidly obese 60-year-old woman cries that her trans babies might be taken away from. Like, I know who these people are. I've looked them in the eyes. It they would die before they walked away from this ideology. It's literally all they have. So that's why I made the prediction I did. I never, ultimately you were always right about what the elites would do, but I had a feeling in my bones like, no, they've gone too far. Too many people have built their entire, maybe in a generation they could walk away from this, but there is no
Mhm.
way they could just do a pivot on it. It just there's too much in the system that lives on it. It would be like trying to get rid of the civil rights movement from the left. It is the left at this point, right? And
Mhm.
now the civil rights movement has become this, and there's just nothing they can do about it, even if they want to, even if they know they should. Matt Grenier said, why would white people in the government in the 50s set up a secret agency to oppress their own people on behalf of minorities? Was it something different at the inception and it evolved into this?
All I'll say is that with the exception of Lyndon B. Johnson, a lot of the people who were involved could be considered, as part of one minority group or another. I'll just separate it that way.
They would not see the people they were manipulating as their people. That'd be probably the
Exactly,
right way to understand.
exactly. And you can read the book and have a look to see who's involved. They're pretty open about it.
Perspicacious Heretic says, "What was the point of all this? It seems to have hurt all the communities involved. What was the what about integrating people in this way gains power? Oh, everything, man. So if you break apart cohesive, I wrote a book about this. If you break apart cohesive communities, you gain power as the government. If you break apart those natural, organic social organizations, it frees up the energy and in the dependence that the government requires in order to take power. So everything about destroying holistic organic communities gains you power. It might destroy functionality eventually, and that's what we're hitting the wall with when it comes to the competency crisis and other things. But in the short term, that's how you gain the power, is by breaking down those alternative communal structures that would otherwise take on power that the government couldn't have access to.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so many times before about Bertrand de Juvenal and the high-low middle mechanism. This is one of the clearest applied examples of it because it's literally like, I've talked before about rival castles. Every single one of those lily white towns is a potential rival castle. So they're literally using these minority groups as human weapons in a way. Um, I mean, it's a kind of in microcosm what happens in the bigger picture with mass immigration. It's exactly the same play. You're bringing in people outside. America's big enough that internal immigration is probably not talked about enough, right? But it's basically using internal immigration as a way to completely transform areas. And I mean, really, it's political power. It is tipping the scales of political power towards the minority groups and away from the white groups in order to capture town after town, state after state, county after county. Um, yeah, it's
Absolutely. Sergeant Hodai says, AA, thanks everything. I see a lot of challenges to the Boomer Truth, but not enough crediting your work. Certainly a lot of...
all I'll say is that Boomer Truth regime is just the name I've given to the waters that we swim in. The fact is the water's still there, so many other people will be able to see the truth of what those waters are. So it's like I wouldn't necessarily say that I would always need to be credited when somebody figures out that our foreign policy has been basically Winston Churchill ever since 1945. Every single war is World War II again. Every enemy is Hitler. Anybody who's against any war is automatically Neville Chamberlain. We all know this stuff. And then on the flip side, any limitation to individual expression or me being able to uh, have a kind of any restraint on my individuality, my individual expression is seen as bad, whereas letting it go in an unlimited way is seen as the ultimate good. I think because that is the society that we live in, lots and lots of people are going to be able to see the same thing, right?
Paladin YYZ says, I think that AA is trying to say is that woke was put away, but I'm not sure what that probably had not been for unlawful interference to the contrary, and that a Monte Cristo would be nice.
Well, I requested a padron, if you remember, but I actually have my hand on a padron, and I was considering having one on air, but no, I think that the whole ecstasy. One of the reasons why I wanted to stop talking about the bet, Auron, is because it started out as a genuine kind of intellectual and academic question as to how things work and what were the limits of top-down power and to what extent to what extent are the elites pragmatic or ideological, and all of these sorts of questions. And basically what happened is that when we made the bet, I felt that all of the positions got too entrenched and the interesting bit seemed to go missing. So I was like, right, well, let's stop doing this. So, every time we talk, it doesn't turn into a battle over this, because ultimately, as with many things, the truth is somewhere in between.
We did our pro wrestling work a little too well, and people started getting so thoroughly on one side or the other that you couldn't say anything without half of the fans coming in, and we couldn't do the analysis anymore because it was more about people screaming at each other than it was about us actually breaking stuff down. That's why we put the cigar slam away.
Yeah, this is something that happens. It's a known phenomenon in pro wrestling when a work turns into a shoot or it becomes like real. Then it's like Bret Hart actually thinks he's the real world champion. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels actually hated each other because the lines get blurred.
Right.
And I thought, well, we don't want to. We were only doing it for box office type thing. So
we're friends. We're not looking to blow each other up over this. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Charlie Mickey says, both of you guys make great stuff. Thank you for the stream. Well, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Paladin YYZ says, if only a power could be achieved through the collection of receipts on your enemies. Well, sometimes it can, to be fair. At the very least, you can make advances with it. So
I think you can delegitimize. It can be a delegitimization process.
Exactly.
To expose things that had been presented to the public. I mean, let's face it, they tricked the public many, 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 many times.
If they think narrative control is important, then you breaking the narrative control is important. That's, I think, pretty straightforward. Daniel Hall says BLM was unleashed during the Floyd riots on behalf of private equity by the CRS and Democrats. Local businesses were targeted, forcing owners to walk away. BlackRock started buying commercial property. Yeah, I don't think we still talk enough about the fact that the BLM riots were a financial tool and a tool of power, not just for the wokeness and the social disruption and all of the culture war stuff, but literally fiscally, it was a coup to destroy what was left of Middle America. It is Sam Francis's prediction that basically hard property of the middle class needs to be destroyed for Leviathan to gain the type of strength it's looking for. They were just playing it out in real life.
Yeah. I don't want to say too much more because the one time I talked about that, one of the few streams I had taken off YouTube, was that name Christine Fitz or something. I just remembered that me and Stephen Carson back in the day reviewed that, and it's one of the very few videos that was wrenched down off YouTube for some reason, and
Interesting.
I still don't know why. So yeah, I'm
Maybe,
aware of that theory though, and that some people have mapped it out.
maybe me and Mr. Carson can recreate that and see what happens.
Yeah.
Dash here says, I wonder what the CRS does for intra-minority crime. They seem to have let the Mexicans win the LA race war. Compton is Hispanic now. Yeah, that is another interesting dynamic, is that the Black community and the Hispanic community do not get along, especially in LA, because of the tensions there. The CRS doesn't really have to downplay minority crime, and because the media is already trained not to cover this intra-minority crime. Crime really doesn't matter for the media until it spills out into white neighborhoods. I know that sounds like a progressive talking point, but it's really true. Again, I've been a news reporter. I have been in the room when they decide what to cover and where. And honestly, the sheriff's office barely even bothers to put out reports of intra-minority crime. They almost never even do press conferences about those, because really the idea is, if you can just kind of have them in a corner and they're not hurting anyone else, then kind of let them do what they want. And this only got amplified after BLM and what Steve Saylor called the Ferguson effect, because really cops just learned that you just don't police minority neighborhoods. That's the answer to
it. The overriding concern, from what I gleaned reading this book on the CRS, is what we might describe as perception management. But the perception really is of white America. That's who
Right.
they care. Those are the minds they're trying to form and keep contained. It's white backlash. It is white perception of race. That's what they care about. The Black community, in terms of them actually caring about the Black community, it's like, yeah, just don't go Malcolm X, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, you can riot a bit, but just not too far, because then the rednecks might get angry, type thing. But really, a lot of the focus, I would say, is on white America as opposed to Black America.
To be really frank and just really blunt about it, the purpose of the CRS is to say, our police aren't probably going to handle these problems, but we don't want a bunch of white guys to get together with shotguns and line up and fight back. That's what they're there to prevent. They're there to prevent, the police might try to manage the riot a little bit, but ultimately they're not really going to get in there and mix it up. But if the neighborhood shows up to try to push back, that's what the CRS is there to prevent. Matt Gredier says, did you all see Gavin Newsom's tweet appealing to the founders and how they were horrified by Trump? Then he immediately followed up by tweeting the same thing in Spanish. I did not, but that is an amazing moment. I might have to go back and check that out. That's amazing. Creeper Weirdo says, Blue Anon needs to be mocked more. It's so bad. I mean, yeah, they talk about conspiracy theories on the right, but theirs are even more insane. QAnon has nothing on what the left actually believes about the United States and its political enemies.
But increasingly, it's just the liberal media.
Yeah.
But they are very close. I mean, there's a guy in this country, Rory Stewart, saying, what is it that Trump wants? It's like, well, it can never be he's actually reacting to a real thing. It's always he's manufactured this, because he's secretly a fascist or something.
Kyle Jones says, great analysis, gents. Auron, please set up a discussion between AA and Dave Smith on free markets. AA's discussion with Dan of Lotus Eaters are great. It's Dave's only autistic take. Actually, that would be fascinating. I would love to see you and Dave Smith have a discussion on a lot of levels, actually. You guys would have a very interesting discussion, I think, on foreign relations and a lot of other things as well. So I would definitely enjoy that.
I just want to say that despite his libertarianism, I came from a libertarian background, so it's like I can never be too harsh on libertarians because I'm having to go at myself from like 5 or 6 years ago. I do think Dave Smith has done some great stuff in past 6 months or so. He's really been quite brave, I think, in some of his, I saw him on Tucker. I saw his various debates and things. He's one of the people who's making interesting things happen over there. So yeah, I kind of like him.
Enrico Pelazzo says, more AA, less Doug Wilson. AA saved my life. Well, see, the beauty of the show is you can see both Doug Wilson and AA in the same space. If you don't understand the value of that, then you don't understand the value of messaging. Let's see here. Cherub Cow says, thanks. Well, thank you very much, sir. Definitely appreciate that. Cyber Chud says, please do more streams together. Thank you. Yes, we'll try to do this on a more regular basis. I know a lot of people enjoy the crossover. Blood-based here with just a donation. Thank you very much, sir. Same with Willie McDuff there. Appreciate it. Let's see here. Perspicacious Heretic again says, I don't really care what is causing woke to decline as long as it goes away. On to the next abomination. Well, they sure did try to do the economic Marxism pivot, but I don't think it took. The Bernie Sanders is not coming back. I don't think they can trot that horse out one more time. Enrico again says, the London stand screw job. I don't know that one, but
it's wrestling, right? The Montreal screw job was a famous event in pro wrestling history.
Okay. Paladin again says, in an interview with Gene Simmons, he remarked that both the British rockers were much more flamboyant and theatrical. They had catchphrases like "buy it now" and "get out." Thoughts?
I'm not sure if anyone would ever describe me as flamboyant.
No, I would not say that.
It's not
many descriptors. That would not be one. Maybe you need like a feather boa. Get the Hulk Hogan thing going on.
Yeah, maybe.
Michael Robertson says, great stream, guys. This stuff is very important, but most importantly, get out. And on that note, you are the final super chat. So let's go ahead and get out, as it were. Thank you once again, AA, for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking with you. If for some reason you have not read his books or taken a course or anything like that, you should most definitely check it out. If it's your first time on this channel, thanks for coming by. Make sure to click subscribe and the bell notification, all that stuff on YouTube, so you know when we go live. If you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to support me, you can pick up the book, The Total State, or you can go to shopblazemedia.com, click on the Auron MacIntyre collection, and pick up some merch so people know that you enjoy the show. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, we'll talk to you next time. Now get out.